We tend to think that, because of what happened subsequently, with hindsight, we see left and right as being strongly opposed. We sometimes overlook how imprecise politics was in many aspects in the 20s, in Germany and in other parts of Europe. It could have taken other forms. Why didn't the Reds win? Why didn't communism win? Interesting question, isn't it? Why? They had all the means, you would think, intellectually, and in terms of political ideas, but they don't. It's the right wing, as we call it. But here, of course, left and right don't really help very much. We have to use them. They are part of our vocabulary now. But left and right do not easily translate in many instances. And so Hitler's left or right orientation, I think, is an example of that. That he comes eventually to be right, as we generally interpret it. But let's remember, we're dealing with National Socialism. National Socialism. Now, it is true that he was intentionally nationalistic, and therefore you'd say of those two parts of the compound word, the element that impresses him is the nationalism. But remember, those who join the party sometimes join it because it's socialism. Raum, Goebbels, Goering originally were impressed by its socialist credentials rather than by this nationalist notion, which every party had, as we said earlier. Every party was nationalist. You couldn't but be that if you wanted to make progress in Germany post-1918. So the National Socialism, which we, of course, subsequently identify with this intense nationalism, remember, it is a compound term, and the socialist element was really quite strong among some of those who joined initially. And for Hitler himself, I don't think he ever read Marx in any detail, and I don't think he ever quite understood Marx, except that he was impressed, as he said in some of his post-dinner talks, that he understood the power of an appeal to the people as the ultimate source of authority. I mean, that's an underpinning of both fascism and communism. The people are the ultimate source of authority. Now, how you interpret the people's will, of course, then becomes a matter of politics, and we have the party leading rather than following. But initially, his attraction to the isms of his time was, again, on this idea of power, following this idea of power. What worked? What could appeal most? What could appeal most attractively to a people who are in distress, German people in distress? And so the socialism he is prepared to accept, because it then fits in with the nationalism, which was his starting point, as it were. So the notion that Nazism is in some way an entirely new concept, he certainly didn't think of it that way. He saw it as in some way the best of German tradition that was being reformed in the post-1918 conditions. So to him it's not a new party. It's a party that needs shaping, and it's new in the sense that it didn't exist in that form pre-1918. But for him it's an expression, or the means in time, of expressing an essentially German notion. Which is why he attaches to it this concept of the Volk, the people. I mean, he was a draftsman of the constitution in 1921 when the party was reformed as the Nazi party. And he insisted on playing down the socialist elements, because he didn't think they would attract, and playing up the idea of the national elements, particularly this idea of a special people ordained by providence, by fate, to be the leaders, racially as well as nationally, of Europe, the Aryan Teutonic peoples. So he gives to Nazism this essential notion of the racial identity as the determinant of the values of the party. Now, of course, racial identity goes way back into the 19th century. Arguments about the purity of race, about the gradations of race, long predate him. But his major contribution to the politics of the 20s, 30s, is to identify German character, German sovereignty, with the idea of racial purity in a very defined way, that Jews, by definition, could not be part of the German people. Not even in an honorary sense. They had to be excluded. He was conscious, of course, that many Germans, many Jewish Germans that fought and died for their country in 1418. He fought with them. Post-war, of course, he's not prepared to admit this. And so the notion that a Jew could be part of the new Germany has to be rejected, has to be destroyed. So he makes the racial identity of the party critical. He was, we now realise, criticised by people like Goering earlier for overemphasis upon race. They said, well, yeah, okay, fine, but let's push the appeal to the workers first. And he said, no, we've got to give it, Nazism, a structure and an identity that all can relate to. Even if it causes great opposition, we don't care, because opposition is simply a definition, an expression of the degree of excitement we've aroused. So, as a young politician, one can call him young, still in his 30s, the racial notion he adopts and develops in a very powerful way, but as we said earlier, it is not predated before 1918. He doesn't grow into it in the sense of a long teleology, which he sometimes, or the Nazis later claim through. He adopts it of a sudden, post-1918. But once he's adopted it, of course, it then becomes the great determinant, the great expression, the great definition of what his values are and what the party's values should be. We mentioned the White Russians. They are, fascinatingly, the main prompters of his first bid for power in the Munich Putsch. And again, this is an irony in a way. The White Russians said, look, we hate 1917, obviously, for what it did to us and our way of life, and destroyed what we were. But it shows what you can do if willpower is aligned to theory. It shows what you can do if you have enough drive and purpose. And they also looked across to Italy and said, look what Mussolini's done. This minority party, he's forced it into the centre of Italian politics. So 1917, and Mussolini give us a model, give us a precedent, or a set of precedents, which we should now follow. And so the Putsch is a response both to the Mussolini model and to the 1917 explosion, which appeared to have been successful, of course, by this time. The Russian Revolution worked. In what effect? To what effect we could argue. But manifestly, something big had happened in 1917. And he's impressed Hitler in 1922-23 and says, yes, we don't wait. We strike now. We strike while we can. Because who knows what the situation will be in a few years. So he makes this preemptive move, if you like, against the future in the Munich Putsch, which is a dismal failure. He's arrested, tried, imprisoned. End of story, you would say, but for one or two other things that happened beyond his capacity to control. And here I think we have to bring in the externals. We concentrate very much on his programme going forward. Hitler was extremely lucky, wasn't he? Manifestly so. Had the German economy recovered, as it seemed likely to do when they got over the inflation problem by the middle 20s, I think one German observer said, Nazism is like a snowball. Subjected to heat, it will melt. And by heat he meant economic recovery. Well, the magic for Hitler is, of course, that economic recovery does not occur. And that's the way in for a party that has very little chance of controlling the situation. Because it's a minority. It remains a minority party right through the time it comes into power. Let's put that in context. When Hitler emerged from Landsberg prison in 1925, he is not a new man, but he has a new political approach. And his approach is, we use the existing Weimar Constitution, with its multi-party allowance, we use it as a way of constitutionally pushing ourselves into a position where we can take power. Extraordinary decision for him to make. I mean, he began as a revolutionary, and all the talk was of seizing power. They tried it in 1953. But after the failure of the putsch, in the Munich Putsch, he then commits himself and his party to a progress based upon electoral success. Now, it seems very unrevolutionary, and many in his party, of course, said it is. And the Strassers, his great internal enemy, said, we have no future as Nazis if we follow this democratic path. It's crazy. We've got to seize power. And one of his great successes was to impose himself on a party that was unhappy